Welcome to Revenge Diaries, where real stories expose the darkest sides of human nature. If you love true crime and real-life mysteries, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss our next documentary. Today, I'm taking you deep into the shadows of Saskatchewan, a place known for peace, but scarred by horror. These are 3 true crime cases that shook Canada to its core. First, the Buffalo Narrows murders of 1969, where a quiet northern town awoke to unspeakable tragedy. Second, the Colin Thatcher case, a political scandal that turned into a story of power, jealousy, and murder in the early 1980s. And finally, the Shell Lake Massacre of 1967, one of the most horrifying family murders in Canadian history, each case more chilling than the last, and all of them heartbreakingly true. If you want to know the full truth behind these 3 shocking cases, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Diaries and hit the like button right now. Because the more support you show, the sooner I'll bring you the full detailed documentaries on each of these horrifying true stories. The Buffalo Narrows Murders, 1969. In the remote northern reaches of Saskatchewan lies the small town of Buffalo Narrows, surrounded by thick boreal forests and frozen lakes. Life there moved at a slow, familiar rhythm. Neighbors knew one another by name, and the isolation of the land created a deep sense of community. By the late 1960s, the town's population was just over 700. Among the families who formed its close-knit core were the Petersons, Thomas and Bernadette, a hard-working Roman Catholic couple in their early 30s, raising 7 children in a modest 2-room home. Their life was simple but full. Winter days spent in deep snow, and summers marked by household chores, community gatherings, and faith. On the bitterly cold night of January 30th, 1969, the temperature plunged to nearly 40 below zero. Buffalo Narrows lay still beneath a blanket of snow, its few roads quiet and windswept. In the Peterson home, the children were asleep, their parents still awake under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. 2 of the older daughters, Connie and Cynthia, were spending the night at their grandmother's house. A small twist of fate that would later prove crucial. That same night, 19-year-old Frederick Moses McCullum left his small home on the outskirts of town. Known locally as a quiet young man who struggled with serious mental health issues, McCullum moved through the snow carrying a long-handled fire axe. His footsteps echoed faintly in the frozen stillness as he walked with eerie determination toward the Peterson home. What happened next would shatter the community's sense of safety forever. Inside, the Peterson family slept as Macklem entered. In moments, he unleashed a violent attack that left Thomas and Bernadette Peterson, along with a family friend, Jean-Baptiste Herman, dead. 5 of the children were injured. Miraculously, 7-year-old Fred Donald Peterson survived despite his wounds, the only child to live through the nightmare. When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived the following morning, the scene stunned even the most seasoned officers. The snow outside was undisturbed, the silence of the settlement heavy and suffocating. Inside, the violence spoke for itself. Investigators quickly determined that the attack had been confined to the home, a targeted act, not a random intrusion. The RCMP immediately locked down the area, setting up a perimeter around Buffalo Narrows and questioning neighbors. It didn't take long before witnesses recalled seeing Macklem the previous night, walking through town with something heavy in his hands. Within hours, a massive manhunt began. Roadblocks were established on the few routes leading out of town, and small aircraft were deployed to scan the vast northern wilderness. As the sun rose weakly over the frozen landscape, fear gripped Buffalo Narrows. The realization that such horror had come from one of their own sent shockwaves through the community. But the search wouldn't last long. Rather than fleeing, Frederick Macklem returned calmly to his mother's home. There he sat down and made a phone call to the local priest. During that call, he confessed to everything, giving details only the killer could know. When police arrived moments later, they found him sitting quietly at the kitchen table, drinking tea. He offered no resistance and showed no emotion. To officers, it was immediately clear something was deeply wrong. During questioning, Macklem spoke in fragmented thoughts, often detached from reality. He described hearing voices, believing objects were communicating with him. Psychiatric evaluators were called in, and after extensive assessment, He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that explained his hallucinations and inability to comprehend his actions. Investigators uncovered a troubled past. Macklem had grown up in a broken home as one of 9 half-siblings. He had bounced between foster care and youth detention centers, often displaying signs of mental instability. Despite red flags, he had never received sustained treatment. The RCMP compiled the evidence carefully, aware that his mental state would dominate the legal proceedings to come. The community, meanwhile, was left grieving and questioning how such tragedy could unfold in a town where everyone knew everyone else. When the trial opened later that year, the courtroom was filled with tension. The defense presented expert testimony showing that McCullum's schizophrenia had rendered him incapable of understanding the difference between right and wrong. The prosecution emphasized the brutal reality of his actions, the lives taken, the families destroyed. After 4.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. Under Canadian law at the time, this meant that while he had committed the acts, he could not be held criminally responsible. Macklem was committed to a high-security psychiatric institution for long-term treatment. For the survivors, life would never be the same. The 2 older sisters, Connie and Cynthia, were left without their parents and most of their siblings. Fred, the youngest survivor, faced lifelong physical and emotional scars. Buffalo Narrows mourned together, a community forever marked by the horror of that winter night. In the years that followed, the case ignited debate across Canada about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and the failures of social systems that left individuals untreated. Many argued that with proper care and intervention, the tragedy could have been prevented. More than 50 years later, the Buffalo Narrows murders remain one of Saskatchewan's darkest chapters, a haunting reminder of how fragile peace can be, and how deeply one community's trust was broken in the span of a single night. The Colin Thatcher case, 1983-84. In the early 1980s, Saskatchewan was known for its quiet prairie towns, long stretches of farmland, and its reputation for political stability. But beneath that calm surface, a story of power, betrayal, and murder was about to unfold, one that would capture the nation's attention and drag a respected politician into the center of a shocking crime. This is the story of Colin Thatcher, a man whose name once stood for ambition and influence in Saskatchewan politics, until it became synonymous with cold-blooded murder. Born into privilege, Wilbert Colin Thatcher was the son of Ross Thatcher, a former premier of Saskatchewan. Politics ran through the family veins, and from an early age, Colin seemed destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Charismatic, intelligent, and confident, he built his career quickly, first as a rancher and businessman, then as a member of the provincial legislature. In 1962, Colin married Joanne Wilson, a beautiful and independent woman from Moose Jaw. At first, they appeared to be the perfect couple, young, attractive, and living a life many admired. They had 3 children and seemed to embody the image of success. But behind the elegant facade, their marriage was fracturing. Colin's temper was notorious. Friends described him as controlling and easily angered. Joanne's friends and family would later say she lived in fear of him, that the man the public saw was very different behind closed doors. By the late 1970s, the marriage had completely deteriorated. Joanne filed for divorce in 1980, citing emotional abuse and a pattern of intimidation. What began as a bitter separation quickly escalated into an all-out war. Legal battles over custody and finances dragged on for years. Colin, still serving as a cabinet minister in the Saskatchewan government, was under growing pressure both personally and politically. He felt humiliated by the public attention their divorce had attracted, and his resentment toward Joanne deepened. In 1981, Joanne moved into a new home on Regina's quiet east side, hoping to start over. But fear never left her. She told friends that if anything ever happened to her, Colin will be responsible. That chilling statement would prove prophetic. On the evening of January 21, 1983, neighbors heard a loud noise from Joanne's home, a single gunshot that shattered the calm of the suburban street. When police arrived, they found Joanne lying dead in her garage, shot twice at close range. There were no signs of forced entry, no theft, and nothing to suggest a random act of violence. Whoever killed her knew exactly what they were doing. The murder stunned Saskatchewan. Joanne Wilson's death became front-page news across Canada, and suspicion immediately fell on her ex-husband. But Colin Thatcher denied any involvement. Calm and composed, he told reporters that he was being framed because of his political status. The RCMP, however, began building a meticulous case against him. They uncovered a tangled web of evidence, inconsistent statements, suspicious phone calls, and witnesses who claimed Colin had spoken openly about getting even with Joanne. Further investigation revealed that Colin had traveled suspiciously, close to Regina around the time of the murder, despite claiming he was elsewhere. Police also found a vehicle matching the description of one seen near Joanne's house that night, connected to someone known to Thatcher. For months, detectives gathered statements and tracked his movements. Then, in May 1984, after more than a year of investigation, Colin Thatcher was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Canadian history. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, and every word of testimony was covered on national television. The prosecution painted Colin Thatcher as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, a husband who could not accept the loss of control over his ex-wife. They argued that he had carefully planned the murder, enlisting others to help him carry it out and creating alibis to cover his tracks. The defense, in contrast, portrayed him as the victim of a political witch hunt, a powerful man targeted because of his reputation and enemies in government. Colin took the stand himself, calmly denying any role in Joanne's death, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses recalled conversations where he expressed his hatred toward Joanne. Investigators detailed how he had stalked and harassed her for years, even after their divorce. After weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Colin Thatcher was sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole for 25 years. The verdict sent shockwaves through Canada, a sitting or former cabinet minister convicted of murdering his ex-wife. For the public, it was both tragic and scandalous, exposing the dark side of political power and domestic abuse. Thatcher maintained his innocence for decades, appealing multiple times, but each attempt failed. He was eventually granted parole in 2006, after serving more than 2 decades behind bars. Even after his release, he remained unrepentant, continuing to insist he had been wrongfully convicted. He went on to write a book defending his version of events, reigniting debate over the case. For many, however, the truth was clear. Joanne Wilson's death was the tragic end of a toxic marriage marked by manipulation and control, and Colin Thatcher's conviction became a defining moment in Canadian criminal history. To this day, the Thatcher case stands as one of Saskatchewan's most infamous trials, a story of power, pride, and the devastating consequences of unchecked anger. The Shell Lake Massacre, 1967. In the heart of rural Saskatchewan lies the quiet village of Shell Lake, a peaceful farming community surrounded by forest, lakes, and the endless expanse of the Canadian prairie. In the mid-1960s, it was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors, where families helped one another through harsh winters, and where tragedy seemed unthinkable. But on January 30th, 1967, that sense of security was destroyed forever. It began just before dawn. The Peterson family, who lived on a small farm 6 miles outside of Shell Lake, were still asleep. James and Evelyn Peterson were hardworking parents raising their 12 children in a modest home, built with love and faith. They were well known and deeply respected in the community. That morning, without warning, a man approached their house. He carried a .22 caliber rifle and wore a heavy coat against the biting cold. His name was Victor Ernest Hoffman, a 21-year-old drifter recently released from a psychiatric hospital. Hoffman had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that left him plagued by delusions and hallucinations. He believed that evil spirits were controlling the world and that he had been chosen to destroy them. Days before the attack, he told relatives he had to kill before he was killed. At approximately 5 a.m., Hoffman reached the Peterson home. Inside, the family was still sleeping, What happened next remains one of the darkest moments in Canadian history. In a sudden, unprovoked burst of violence, Hoffman opened fire inside the home, methodically moving from room to room. By the time it was over, 9 members of the Peterson family were dead, both parents and 7 of their children, ranging in age from 2 to 17. Only 4-year-old Phyllis Peterson survived, miraculously spared as she slept under her blankets, hidden from sight. Her cries later led neighbors to the horrific scene. When police arrived, the small farmhouse was silent except for the creaking of the wind through broken glass. Officers who entered described it as one of the most horrifying crime scenes they had ever witnessed. Word of the massacre spread quickly, sending shock and disbelief throughout Saskatchewan and across Canada. Why would anyone do this? And how could such violence erupt in a place so peaceful? Investigators immediately launched a province-wide search. Clues were scarce, but within 2 days, they found Hoffman wandering aimlessly near the small community of Spiritwood, about 40 kilometers away. He was cold, disoriented, and offered no resistance when police arrested him. During interrogation, Hoffman's statements were chilling. He claimed that he had been ordered by God to kill the Peterson family to rid the world of evil. He spoke of voices, demons, and unseen forces that told him what to do. Psychiatrists quickly determined that he was suffering from acute paranoid schizophrenia, rendering him incapable of understanding reality or the consequences of his actions. The case moved swiftly through the courts. Given his diagnosis, Hoffman was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed indefinitely to a maximum security psychiatric institution. For the people of Shell Lake, however, the verdict brought little comfort. The Petersons had been beloved, a symbol of family, faith, and hard work. Their funeral, held in the small local church, drew hundreds of mourners from across the province. The entire community came together in grief, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. In the months that followed, public outrage grew. Many questioned how someone as unstable as Hoffman could have been released from a hospital just weeks before committing mass murder. The tragedy sparked national debate about mental health care, early warning systems, and the risks of untreated psychosis. Over the years, the Shell Lake Massacre became etched into Canadian history as a haunting reminder of the gaps in mental health care and how untreated illness can erupt into unimaginable violence. Victor Hoffman remained institutionalized for most of his life, occasionally reviewed by medical boards, but never deemed safe for release. He lived in psychiatric custody until his death in 2004. The community of Shell Lake, though forever scarred, endured. The Peterson family's surviving children were raised by relatives. Their story, a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. Today, more than half a century later, the Shell Lake murders are still spoken of in hushed tones, a story passed down through generations as both a tragedy and a warning. In the vast, quiet landscape of northern Saskatchewan, the memory of that winter morning lingers, a chilling echo of how fragile life can be when help comes too late. All 3 parts now form a complete documentary trilogy of Saskatchewan's most haunting true crime stories, unified by themes of mental illness, loss, and the human cost of systemic failure.